Now, when you get to verses 26 and 27, they're literally in the middle of our passage. So let's read verses 26 through 27. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, and they said, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." At this point in the center of the story, the disciples are realizing that death is a very real possibility. The text tells us that they believe they're seeing a ghost, which comes from the word phantasma. A phantasma is an evil spirit. The disciples believe they're seeing an evil spirit coming to them towards the sea, to them on the sea. And it's at this moment, this precise moment, that Jesus speaks to them and a shift occurs in the story. Here we see Jesus encouraging the disciples with the knowledge of his presence. And for you, the application is simple but profound. You don't have to be afraid because Jesus is with you. Jesus doesn't send you a feeling. He doesn't put butterflies in your chest. He doesn't want you to necessarily feel amazing. That's not where courage comes from. Like the disciples, we don't have to be afraid because we have the knowledge of his presence. He's literally with you, Christian. He tells you so. So don't let your fear paralyze you. Let your reason, grounded in the reality of Christ's promise to be with you, usurp any feelings of fear that you may have in any given situation. In fact, the phrase, "do not be afraid," appears 365 times in the Bible. It's a fact that you can take comfort in. And personally, I think this is just an opinion of mine. I interpret Jesus' words to be miraculous here because he would have been speaking to them from a distance in the storm, right? And storms tend to be very loud. He must have projected quite loudly, or not even loudly, but supernaturally, right? And this is where we get to the points that I want to share with you from the passage today. There are 5 principles that you can apply to your life today from this story. So let's get into it. At verse 29, Peter got out of the boat and he walked on the water and came to Jesus. Now, this is the first time that we see Peter step out on his own outside of the disciples. If you can imagine rain and wind is slapping him in the face. But Peter got out of the boat. The more specifically, Peter was the only one to get out of the boat. And that's what you need to do in your life, right? See, we all have boats, bubbles, wall of defense, whatever you want to call it, that we put up to avoid our problems, things that we're scared of. But instead of truly placing your faith in the King of Kings, you know that deep down there's an area in your life where you do not trust Jesus. And you know it because as a Christian, the Holy Spirit is convicting you of that, to give it up to God. So what you need to do is step out in faith, even when no one else does. Peter recognized that being in the middle of a storm with Jesus is better than being in his little safety bubble of a boat without Jesus, right? And even though Peter was the only one to step out of the boat, the miracle was also significant for the other disciples. They all lay witness to the miracle. It was important for them to see Jesus walking on the water. And like the prophet Moses before him, here Jesus demonstrates his command over the sea. Last week we established the biblical connection between Moses and Jesus, and that his providing of the bread to the 5,000 would have made the Jews recall God giving manna to Israel when Moses led them in the desert for 40 years. Remember, this storm is during the next early morning. Passover is still coming up. The disciples knew this story of Moses parting the waters to rescue their people from destruction. But unlike Moses, Jesus didn't need a rod to part the waters. He could simply walk on top of it. It was important for the disciples to see and understand who Jesus was. And that's a point that I'll come back to later in the story. But first, notice the rest of the verse, verse 29. Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And what I want you to notice is that Peter did not say, hey, can I come out there? Would that be okay? No. He wanted Jesus to tell him to do something. Peter understood that to have faith requires us to live in obedience to God. He wanted to follow Jesus' instruction. So what does this mean for you? What I'm saying is that in everything you do, you should always seek God's will over your own will. Say that more simply, I would just say, seek God first, right? How can you ever expect to step out in faith or step out of your boat if you're not willing to submit to God's will for your life? And the obvious question that comes from this is, what are you not submitting to God's will for your life? If there's anything you're holding on to, give it up to God. Because if your will is to do His will, you're not going to have to worry about where He leads you. God is faithful to guide you through life. And sometimes this means that God will open doors. Sometimes it means that God will shut doors. And for the faithful Christian, that should be okay. Why? Well, because a faithful Christian understands that fulfilling the Lord's will bring him or her immense joy. As Jesus says in His sermon on being the true vine from John chapter 15, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in His love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full.